This year's Montreal Jazz Festival was overshadowed by controversy over a show that triggered a heated debate, drawing international headlines. SLAV featured mainly white actors dressed as cotton pickers working the fields and singing traditional African-American slave songs. Faced with a public backlash, Jazz Fest organizers canceled the show, raising complex and sensitive questions about cultural appropriation and artistic freedom. Joining us to discuss this is Rachel Zellars, a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of History at the University of Vermont, who also lectures at McGill. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us on a very sensitive topic, obviously. One of the issues highlighted by this whole controversy is representation or lack thereof, and the exclusion of people of color from certain spaces, particularly in arts, the media, something that critics will argue is not necessarily recognized or understood. What's your take on that?
I think representation is absolutely one of the key issues here. Representation is, an essential issue whenever the lives, culture, or history of Black people are being portrayed, particularly in productions where their literal presence is being absented in some way. One of the things that feels important to mention is the statement, the letter against the show SLAV that was drafted by a number of local Black artists and activists. Representation was absolutely key in their list of demands, and of course funding as well. Representation is also key because we are here and we are everywhere. We are the largest population outside of Ontario. And in every demographic indicator that one can find, we are absolutely systematically excluded. I was reviewing just quickly today the 2010 Black demographic study from McGill. And one of the things that I had forgotten about is that the finding that members of our community on the French and English side who have obtained the same educational qualification as white Quebecers earn dramatically less than their non-Black or white counterparts. And the study also concludes that for those of us that obtain PhDs in this place, we systematically, with higher educational qualifications, earn less in every area than white Quebecers, for example, with much lower educational qualifications. So representation is key, and it was key in that statement as well.
Okay, so this show was for many people an illustration of that lack of representation. Now, the director, Robert Lepage, says that essentially this was censorship and that he was muzzled. And he's had support from prominent columnists, from politicians, the Parti Québécois. But is that a real concern? I mean, is it valid to say that it's a slippery slope when you start shutting down artistic productions that you don't agree with?
Well, I brought his statement in case I wanted to quote from it directly. I want to say this, that the Jazz Fest really made an important but very baseline response by issuing an apology. Lepage's response, however, was indecent on all fronts, and I want to just take a moment to unpack that, so interrupt me if you need to. When any person or institution is, confronted with issues of bias or racism, the most common response, unfortunately, is to first and foremost state one's good intent, and secondly, and that's important, state one's good intent, which always has the effect of decentering the person who's alleging harm or who's been harmed. And the second thing that commonly occurs is a centering of one's own victimization, if you will. And this statement does both things. The statement very indecently and violently begins with a statement of one's good intent. And by the fifth paragraph of his statement, and I'll just look at it here because I have it in front of me, where he begins to mention, to me, what is most appalling is the intolerant discourse heard on both sides and in the media, is really a way of him putting himself in the position of victimhood. Art is never above critique, and I think that's what you were getting at. Art is never, ever above critique, particularly when it relies on the bodies and stories and histories of people who are intentionally taken out and absented from the very production itself.
Well, I'm so sorry to have to interrupt you, but we are out of time, unfortunately. I wish we had more time because this is such a fascinating discussion.
Well, we can keep it going at another time.
Yes, we absolutely can. So thank you for coming in. It's a complex issue, and unfortunately, it's been very divisive, but we hope to have more conversations so maybe people can come a little bit closer together.